Okay, you know what this means. I'm up here, you're out there, so let's talk. I am really happy y'all are here tonight. I'm Kate Wheeler. I'm the president and CEO of Crystal Cove Conservancy. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Sorry, I have a note over here that's gonna fly away. So, thank you for being here to welcome Kate Huckelbridge, who is the executive director of the California Coastal Commission. We're here tonight to talk about the 50th anniversary of the Coastal Act, which will be really wonderful. And I promise I will circle back and introduce you properly in a moment. But we always like to start with acknowledgement of the history of the land. Crystal Cove State Park is part of the ancestral homelands of the Ahashiman and Tongva tribal nations, both ocean-going peoples whose relationship to this coastline goes back thousands of years. Long before we were telling stories about this place, people were living in relationship with it. We're also gathered tonight in front of the Japanese language school, which was built in the 1920s by a community of Japanese American farming families who leased land from the Irvine Company and lived and worked along Crystal Cove's shoreline until the US entered World War II. They built this structure as a cultural center and a gathering place where their children could learn the Japanese language and traditions. Of course, when the US entered World War II, everything changed for those families. They were removed from their homes and the land that they had worked and incarcerated in camps. Today, we're working with the Japanese American community, including descendants of some of the families who lived here, to expand and deepen the way their story is told. I also want you to know who else is here tonight. Of course, we like to start with Laura Davik, the founder of Crystal Cove Conservancy. She's always here. She's always here. We also have some other board members here, board members of Crystal Cove Conservancy and Crystal Cove Management Company. Would you let people know where you are? There's one, Glenn. I saw Eric. There's Eric. Thank you for joining us. Teddy Ray is our board chair, the world famous Teddy Ray. You'll know her when she gets here. She'll be here any minute. Let's see, who else is here? Laguna Beach Mayor Pro Tem Hallie Jones, who also happens to be Crystal Cove Conservancy's executive vice president. I think she will also be joined, if she hasn't already, by Alex Runagi and Mark Orgill, both members of the City Council. So today, though, is about the Coastal Act and the commission that is charged with implementing it. Sorry, lost my place, but I've found it now. About 10 years ago, I was working here at Crystal Cove as director of development. For several years, I'd been carrying around a quote by Peter Douglas, the longtime Coastal Commission executive director. He said, "The coast is never saved, it's always being saved." Every few months, I would print a sheet of address labels with that line on them and stick them on everything. Meeting agendas, strategic plans, file folders, my journal, the corner of my laptop, things other people would see, and things only I would see. Around that same time, I was applying for a job with the International Fund for Animal Welfare. But don't worry, I ended up back here. When I sat down to write the cover letter, I ended up writing about those labels and what that line from Peter Douglas had meant to me. And because this seemed perfectly reasonable at the time, I peeled off one of the labels, stuck it to the top of the letter, scanned it all in, and sent it. I got the job. And in ways I couldn't have anticipated at the time, it set the next chapter of my life in motion. It gave me a way of thinking about conservation, a way that says that there's no finish line, that we have to keep paying attention. Of course, Peter would never know any of that. He would never know that something he said years earlier got printed and found its way onto dozens of labels and into half of the things in my office. He never knew it found its way onto a cover letter. He never knew it helped shape an entire chapter of someone else's life. For years, I thought I was carrying that line around, but looking back, it feels more like it was carrying me, very two footprints in the sand. And as I've gotten to know Kate and her work, I've come to suspect she has a sheet of those labels too. Maybe not literally, but if you spend almost 17 years at the California Coastal Commission, working as a scientist, a district director, a deputy director, a tribal liaison, a senior deputy director, and now executive director, I imagine there's some version of that. Today, Kate is the executive director of the California Coastal Commission and the first woman to hold that role in the commission's history. Her path to the California coast started a long way from here, though, in Cleveland Heights, Ohio, I think, and took her through Northwestern, UC Berkeley, and environmental consulting before she joined the commission in 2009. Since then, she spent almost 17 years helping shape the institution from the inside. She wasn't parachuted in. She grew up professionally inside the commission and has helped shape it from within. So Kate, thank you for being here tonight. It's lovely to talk to you. I always like to start with origin stories. So how does someone from Cleveland Heights, Ohio, end up here spending her life helping steward the California coast?
Thank you, Kate, and thank you for having me, and thank you all for being here. What an amazing honor it is to be here in this space, talking with all of you tonight. And start thinking of your questions now, because I really want to get some good ones from all of you later when we get to that point in the program. So my path to here was not straight, as you might imagine. I did grow up on a coast. I grew up on the coast of Lake Erie. It looks a little different than this one. But I think in a lot of ways, it's one of the reasons I ended up where I am. So the coast that I grew up on was a very industrial coast. Lake Erie was not swimmable as I was growing up. I think my house probably was maybe 10 miles as the crow flies to the coastline. And yet to get to a swimmable beach, we had to go maybe an hour outside of the city. Also, as most of you are probably familiar with, Cleveland is pretty infamous for one major event in the late 60s when the Cuyahoga River caught on fire. It was so polluted from all the industry and dumping into the river that the river itself actually caught on fire. Well, the pollution on top of it, but you know, it made for pretty dramatic pictures. So I grew up in the aftermath of that, and I think it was not the only one that sort of, there was like this environmental awakening, I think, that happened. And, you know, the Cuyahoga River, along with the Santa Barbara oil spill and a few other things, are one of the things that brought the EPA into existence and started the process of really passing these environmental laws that we now have had and lived with for many years. And I grew up in that. So I think I became this budding environmentalist, maybe is the best way to put it. And so it wasn't until I graduated and went off to Northwestern thinking I would do something different that I got really pulled back into the environmental side. That plus an excellent calculus professor in high school convinced me to do engineering. So
nice. I think Brett Sanders is here, or he will be. Speaking of engineering.
Yay, right.
Brett's here.
That's right. Cheers to the engineers. So I took that path and really focused. I did environmental engineering at Northwestern. And then after that, I took a consulting job, as you mentioned. And I ended up in North Carolina working for a consulting firm that did mostly air work. And I quickly discovered I did not like to do air work and that I really belonged back in the water space. And that brought me out to California. And I went to grad school at Berkeley and really did most of my graduate work inland. I was not working in coastal spaces up until I came to the Coastal Commission, actually. So I did a lot of work in wetlands. That was my graduate specialty, wetland dynamics and modeling. And then I graduated with my PhD. I had 2 babies and was trying to figure out what to do next. I applied for a fellowship through NOAA, the NOAA Coastal Management Fellowship, and ended up interviewing with Susan Hanch, who some of you may know, who was the longtime Chief Deputy Director at the Coastal Commission. And she turned to me and said, "Do you really want a fellowship, or would you prefer to just come work half-time for me while you have these small kids?" And that sealed it. I said, that is exactly what I want to do.
Yes, thank you.
Yes. And I kind of fell into the Coastal Commission. I had to call my engineering professor at Berkeley and say, have you heard of this Coastal Commission? What do they do?
And had your professor heard of the Coastal Commission?
Vaguely. Yes, my professor knew a little bit more about our sister agency, BCDC, the Bay Conservation Development Commission, which is just in San Francisco Bay. And sort of, he said, I don't know much, but go for it. That was sort of the attitude. And so I did, and promptly fell head over heels for the California coast and the Coastal Act.
Right. Thank you. Let's stay with your path for a few minutes. You joined, as you said, the commission in 2009, and since then you have held a number of roles. You started as a scientist, and then you became a district director, a tribal liaison, a deputy director. What have you learned by seeing the commissions through so many different roles and so many different lenses, and what changes when you're suddenly responsible for all of it?
I have learned that, first of all, several things. The Coastal Act itself, I think, is this really visionary piece of law. And I think in all of the different roles, I've used it in lots of different ways and implemented it in different ways. And I think having those different roles helps you see how policy can be implemented in a number of different ways. The thing that I was the most drawn in by the Coastal Commission, which may be surprising to folks, but as an engineer, I'm a problem solver. That's what we do. That's, you're brought in to help fix a problem and find solutions. I came to the Coastal Commission and quickly found that is exactly what the work is. We are problem solvers. And again, I imagine that's probably a little surprising to many to think of a regulatory agency as problem solving, but that's exactly what it was. And so I was drawn in to the work through that, and then all of the different roles, it was sort of bringing different pieces of the Coastal Act and all the challenges that we see on the coast, whether it was a physical, coastal erosion is one example, or maybe it was how do we address a tribal concern under the law as it exists, or how do we want to think in California about energy? What, especially in our space, in the coastal space, offshore energy. What does that look like? How do we want to think about it? And so I think it really allowed me to think through how we can use the Coastal Act to solve those problems. That was one of the main things. The other thing I learned is that the staff at the Coastal Commission are the best possible staff ever in the whole state. I'm obviously biased. I've only ever worked for the Coastal Commission, but the dedication and belief in the work that we do drives the staff. And so I've seen that and lived it, and it drew me in. And it made me want to work with these people who were doing this great work. And so here I am doing that work.
Uh-oh. No, it's okay. Everything's fine. So tell me, how does that change? Like, you grew up with these people in this space, in that organization. How does that change when suddenly you're at the helm and you're responsible for all of it? Now, I know that means you don't do everything. You have an amazing team behind you and commissioners all around you, but it really does change things, I would imagine.
It does. It does change things. I mean, as a leader of the agency, it's a lot of responsibility. I have, but a lot of trust. And I think that has been a touch point. One of the, coming from the staff of the agency, I think that has mattered at the Coastal Commission because you do develop a trust with the people you're working with. And that includes the commission as well. You develop a trust relationship. And so I think that that has not changed. But it has allowed me to make the changes I need to as a leader because the staff trusts me. They know who I am. They know what I'm about and what I'm here for. And likewise, we trust each other to do this work. So as I need to make a controversial decision or step in and I don't know whether it's even managerial, there's that trust has, I think, allowed that transition to be maybe as smooth as possible. And, I work with a lot of folks who've seen different leaders at the Coastal Commission, and so I've seen that transition, and I think helped me to make it myself, but also smooth the path for others as well. But it's a lot of pressure to be at the helm of this agency that's sort of at these crossroads, and I'm grateful that I have that staff, the background. It's helped a lot.
Thank you. I want to follow up just another first in your story. Got a bit of applause at the beginning here. You're the first woman to lead the commission in its 50-year history. Mm-hmm. Can you talk a little bit about what that's like, other than the applause? I mean, that is what women at work get, is a lot of applause.
It's, I think it was sort of a natural outgrowth of the way the staff has evolved over time. I mean, my bosses at the commission were all women. Aside from the executive directors, but my immediate bosses were women. There's a lot of women leaders at the commission, so I don't think it felt unusual for the staff or the commission. What has been really interesting and fun, actually, is that most of the coast and ocean-based organizations at the state, so the Ocean Protection Council, the Coastal Conservancy, in this space of time are all led by women, with one exception. BCDC still is led by a man. But that has been this interesting dynamic. And I think somebody pointed it out to me after I was appointed, or maybe it was after Jen Eckerly, who's the deputy secretary for Coast and Ocean, was appointed. There's this old picture of all of the agency heads in a room. It was like back in the 70s, all men. They're, very 70s. I mean, they might as well have had cigars and, sort of had that vibe, right? And somebody sent around this picture and said, I just want to point out that every man in this room has been replaced by a woman. And it was sort of this, we had all these ideas. We need to recreate the picture. And, we haven't done that yet, but stay tuned. That'll be a fun one.
Something to look forward to. Yeah. I want to talk about the Coastal Act itself. One of the things I think about things that are successful is that eventually people stop noticing them, maybe stop talking about them. For the people who don't know the story or who only know pieces of it, tell me about what happened in California in the 1970s. Why was Proposition 20 such a big deal? And what has it made possible?
So the history of the Coastal Act is one of my favorite stories to tell, and I'm sure many of you have lived it and been a part of it. But if you go back to the late 60s and the early 70s, it was a time of rapid development. There was a lot going on across the state. And in our coastal spaces, there were several instances of lands that were purchased and privatized. And a lot of people that used to be able to get to the coast in a particular area could no longer reach the coast in that space. And it really set people off and reminded everyone that we have this public trust doctrine, which means that our coast is, it's a public resource and it's held in trust by the state for all people. And so when people saw that their access that they had previously enjoyed was cut off or changed or it looked different, I think it really galvanized a lot of folks to do something about it. And so there were movements up and down the coast, and there was a big one in the Bay Area. That was sort of the initial one, but then it really expanded to the Save Our Coast movement. And there was an effort to get legislation passed a couple of times. That didn't work, and so they decided to do an initiative, which was Prop 20. And it really was a grassroots initiative. I mean, this was, these are scientists and parents and, surfers and, really everyday people who loved the beach and loved being able to access it, who came together to support this initiative, Prop 20. And they were up against a huge fight. I mean, it was the opposition was well funded. It was all the major development interests and big industry interests, and they were incredibly well funded. The campaign was pretty impressive. But they didn't have that grit, I think, that the Prop 20 Save Our Coast movement had. And so there's some really great stories. We actually we commissioned a documentary on Prop 20. It's on our website. I would really recommend, if you have time, it's about, we have different versions. There's a half-hour version, and then there's like an hour-and-a-half version. It's really
fascinating. Do the long version.
Do the long version. It is really good, but there's some great stories that came out of the hijinks associated with the campaigns. But Prop 20 passed, and that created the Coastal Commission, and it set in motion what was the passage of the Coastal Management Plan that eventually became the Coastal Act. And it really was this incredible moment in time that brought together folks from all different walks of life who acknowledged that these coastal spaces are for the public. And that was paramount. And it was a resource that was worth protecting. And so they created us, the Coastal Commission, and then the Coastal Act sort of basically just tied that all together. And how do we think about that, and what does it look like? So it was actually it's a visionary law, as I said before, and it came from the people. We are the only state agency that I'm aware of that was created out of a state of initiative, a vote of the people. And that public engagement in the commission's origin history, I think, has really changed, not even changed, but just defined how we work, how we do our work, how we interact with the public, and why we are what we are today.
Thank you. I want to return to Peter Douglas for a minute. I imagine there are a few conversations you're in that keep returning to Peter Douglas, who's an icon. Here's the rest of the quote. It didn't fit on my labels, but here it is. "You can't take our relationship with the coast for granted, because it took a lot of blood, sweat, and tears to preserve it so we have what we have today. These things didn't just happen. The coast is what it is because a lot of people worked really hard and sacrificed to protect it. And if we want it to be there for our children, we have to keep fighting to protect it. In that way, the coast is never saved. It's always being saved." So I wanted to read that back because it strikes me that it's kind of your job description. And I wonder what it's like to do work where there is no finish line. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, it is never boring. It is absolutely true. There is no finish line because the work that we're doing is constant. The pressures are constant, and the need for us to be doing this work that we're doing is constant. That at times is exhausting, and at times it's energizing. So I think it's riding the wave, essentially. That's kind of how I think about it, as riding those things. But again, I think the agency, we move forward because, even in the face of that kind of constant pressure, and you never get there, and did we do it? I don't know. Partially because of, it's days like this for me when I come out and I get to see these places of the coast that the commission has had some small role in, and that helps make it worth it, right? It helps push you forward in the moments that feel dragging and you're not sure you're going to get there, but the reality is that it can be tough, and a lot of it just takes a lot of dedication, I think, from the staff. And we're lucky we have it. And again, starting, just with Peter as a visionary leader, providing that the Coastal Act itself, but then the basis for us to do this work. And it has sort of defined the culture of the agency. And that has mattered. And so part of my job is keeping that moving forward, as, making sure that all this, the staff and the applicants, everybody that we work with understand why we're doing what we're doing, the importance of it, what's at stake, and then, making sure that we have all the right skills and tools we need to keep that work moving forward.
So talk to me a little bit about Peter and in his long shadow. You say being in places like this that the Coastal Act and the Coastal Commission has had a small part in. The Coastal Commission and the Coastal Act has had a large part in this place, certainly. And I know Peter Douglas played a large part in Laura Davick's life and in her ability to turn this into what it is. So I wonder what that's like. Does he come up as often as I think he does? And what's that like being in that long shadow?
So he does come up often. And honestly, I think for me, my personal experience with it, when I came to the Coastal Commission, I kind of fell into it. I wasn't driven by this, this is what I want to do with my life. I didn't really even understand it. And it was the first time I had ever worked for somebody that I was incredibly inspired by. And again, I've worked for amazing people before I came to the Coastal Commission. I've been very fortunate and had, worked with great leaders, but having somebody that was a true inspiration to, and with the work that he accomplished and, the coastline, all these things, it drew me in. And it really, I have always looked at it as sort of standing on his shoulders. And I don't know if, Charles and Jack, who followed him first, would say the same thing. It can be hard to live in someone's shadow. At the same time, we're here because of this amazing framework he developed for all of us. And again, it's that inspirational piece to me that was, that has been it has sort of sustained me through my career. And I do have these moments. I knew Peter. I had the great fortune to work with him for several years while he was still executive director. And I'm really grateful for that because I have a whole bunch of new staff who never got the chance to meet him. And I sort of, how do we kind of keep the legacy going that he created? That's been a big, an effort. At the same time, understanding we need to modernize. Like there are things that we need to do and we need to do it differently because times change. And so, doing both of those things at the same time can be a challenge. And I am fortunate to have still many staff that knew him and move that legacy forward. And at the same time, understand that things do need to change in certain areas and understanding that Peter would actually be driving that change were he here. So it's been just a privilege, I think, to work at the commission and have gotten the chance to work with Peter.
But I like the reframe from in his shadow to on his shoulders. And I think he would too, from what I've heard of him. Yeah. When you became executive director in 2023, you said the coast is never saved. There it is again. It's always in the process of being saved. And some of the commission's greatest accomplishments are the developments that were never built. I love that idea, but it's one of the hardest things to explain. You're asking people to notice what isn't there. Luxury resorts that didn't get built, for example, a wetland that doesn't get filled in. Most of the time, those stories fade from people's memory once those fights are over. And I think the closest example to us is Trestles. Mm-hmm. Nearly 4,000 people turned out to oppose the 241 toll road. Were any of you some of those 4,000 people? I knew there would be people. I knew some of you were the 4,000. I wasn't here then. I'm sorry I missed it. But it became one of the defining coastal battles of our generation. So how do you talk to people about measuring success, at least in part, by what doesn't happen?
I think that's in part why Peter's quote has become sort of the mantra of the commission, because you are absolutely right. It's really hard to show success of an agency when it's not, we built this many things or we have this many, it is a challenge. What's sort of fascinating, and there's examples of this all up and down the coast. I mean, Trestles is the nearest one here. More recently, Newport Banning Ranch. We have examples in Big Sur with Hearst and then Hearst Ranch and moving up the coast. I mean, you have all these fantastic examples of developments that were proposed and didn't happen. Most of those, I think those are historical for the most part at this point and several years in the rearview mirror. And so thinking forward about what are the big challenges and the big, but fights or battles that we have coming for us, it looks a little different. I mean, there's less huge tracts of land available for development, first of all. And second of all, I think we've done a really good job of both conserving and preserving our coastal spaces, but also in making it clear what's allowable and not under the Coastal Act. So the expectations have changed. Mm-hmm. So we don't get a lot of the same proposals of that scale anymore because they're not allowed under the law.
They know what they're in for.
But we have plenty of battles ahead. And, I think ahead of us, there's, I was thinking about this, what are our biggest challenges up and coming? And, one of the biggest one, of course, is climate change and sea level rise. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But oil and gas is going to be a big fight in the next several years. And so strap in, folks, because it's going to get really bumpy. And that, we have a disagreement in California with our federal administration right now about offshore oil and gas and its place in California. And that is going to be a big battle. I think another, just back on the sea level rise, how we adapt our shorelines to climate change is a huge I don't think of it as a battle per se, but it's a huge it's just a huge challenge. There's no other way to put it. And I think that is going to define a lot of the conversations we have over the next several years. It's not sexy. Fighting oil and gas is a little more appealing for folks. But, when you're talking about sea level rise planning, it's a little harder to think about what that looks like. But I would argue it is just, if not more important, for the state of California. The other one thing I would add is affordability. And I think as Californians, we live this issue every day in our lives, in all of our spaces. But again, our ethos here is that this coast belongs to everyone. Everybody should have access to it. And so I think at the Coastal Commission, we have worked really hard to get that affordability piece in there. Because again, this is some of the most, we regulate some of the most valuable real estate in the world. And the development pressures are huge. The economic potential is huge and important for the state. It's an economic engine. But how do we ensure that we are not pricing out our own folks from getting to the coast and being able to stay? That's why Crystal Cove is so fantastic. But, we have a lot of, I think we've done a lot of good work in this space. State Parks is a fantastic partner in this space. We have the same mission in that way. But how do we ensure that the access that we are creating or protecting really remains open and affordable for folks is going to be an enormous challenge.
So we touched on it a little bit, but I want to talk about friction for a minute. People love the coast. People don't always love the Coastal Commission. Might be news. Our North Beach project, the restoration right down here in behind the boardwalk, it took us 7 years to get a coastal development permit, maybe 6. Archivist says 6. At the time, that felt like a very long time, whether it was 6 or 7. One of the commission's concerns was that the boardwalk would act like a seawall and contribute to coastal erosion. So we had to design it so that the natural beach could continue underneath it and dissipate wave energy rather than accelerating sand loss. If you want to see it next time you're on a walk, just instead of looking at the ocean for just 1 minute, look up under the boardwalk and you'll see what I'm talking about. A few years ago, Hurricane K and king tides came through at the same time and gave us a real-world test. At cottage number 13, the Beaches Cottage, which sits behind a historic seawall, we lost a tremendous amount of sand. A sinkhole opened, the fence collapsed, we had to close the cottage for repairs. The boardwalk functioned exactly like the commission said it would. Yes, applause for that. And this is where I should probably stop talking about coastal erosion because Brett Sanders is here and he is UCI faculty and he is, that doesn't make me feel any better, Brett. These guys know more about it than I do. But when that happened, Brett came by and after that storm, he wanted to walk the beach. And I followed him because I do, whenever he comes by, I follow Brett to see what I can learn. And we looked at cottage number 13 and we looked at the boardwalk. And it was one of those moments where I could see firsthand what the Coastal Commission had been trying to tell us. What I could see was that the commission was right. So here's my question. How do you think about being the agency people sometimes resent, even when they love the mission and even when they love the coast? And what do you wish more people understood about how decisions are made?
So I think all the staff live in that reality every day. We work with, applicants who are angry that they have to come to the Coastal Commission and get a permit, and they had to do that through the city. Why do they also need to come to the Coastal Commission? And I want to get into my house. And I think we get it. And I think I've just lived that reality for so long. It's just part of the work that we need to do. And I think the way that we attack that issue at the Coastal Commission is just by calm explaining of why we do what we do, why it's important, and then trying to make the case for, we get it. It's an additional layer of review and it takes more time. And that was by design. That was what Prop 20 said, is that our coast is important enough to all people that it is worth an extra look. And so that's what we do. And I try to empathize and sympathize with folks who have to go through it, because I get it. It's not always fun. And sometimes it's, it takes more time, it's a little more expensive. And that is the reality. And the best we can do is explain why and hope that we're right when Mother Nature comes through and does what she's going to do. And hope that we are creating enough goodwill in those spaces that people will start to, hopefully understand. And we do a lot of trying to do that relationship building and trust building out in the world. And, it's maybe not applicant by applicant, but with cities and explaining. I just was at the CSAC conference, the county government conference, and doing a Coastal Act 101, because we work with cities and counties all the time, but it's surprising to me how little they know about what we do and why. And so I was invited and was able to kind of do a primer. And so when a decision that a county makes or a city makes also has to go in front of the Coastal Commission, they at least have a little bit of an understanding why. And so I think that's how we attack that issue, is just to try to explain why we're doing what we're doing. It's not because we enjoy making people's lives hard, although that does happen sometimes. But it's because we really care about these resources, and we want them to be available to folks, and we want, habitat to exist, and we want us to be able to continue to enjoy these spaces into the future.
Yeah. Well, Coastal Commission did put us through our paces but also invested deeply and helped us figure out solutions, and directed in lieu fees here. And that helped both with the restoration, $4 million in lieu fees helped with the North Beach restoration, and $1 million in lieu fees started our coastal engineering endowment, which UCI's engineering department has really been helping us build out over the last few years. So we've got young people coming up behind who will know how to tackle these problems too. We're talking about coastal erosion, and I guess I'm going to keep talking about it. Sorry, Brett. One of the things that's striking is how quickly this has stopped being a future problem. We can point right down the coast from where we are to San Onofre, San Clemente, Doheny, the south sector of California State Park's Orange Coast District, and see places where beach loss and coastal erosion are already reshaping what people can do, where they can go, what infrastructure survives. So how do you think about loss, though? Not protection, not preservation, but what we're losing. What does it look like to manage coastal erosion, coastal loss right now?
It's a really excellent question, and I did have the great fortune to spend my morning with Brett and John talking about this very problem and question. And I think the first thing we need to understand is the science. In other words, what different forces are resulting in coastal erosion, because it really does look different. You can have beaches that are eroding very quickly, others that look like they're growing, and then a storm comes in and it changes the whole system. And so understanding the science is the first piece, because once we understand what the science is, then we can do the planning. And I think we have been trying to educate the public to the extent that we can, and that also includes our partners at the state and others, about beach loss and the consequences of beach loss and what leads to beach loss. And as we're doing that education, we're preparing ourselves for all this really intensive planning that we need to do with all of our local government partners. So for those of you who don't know, the Coastal Act is that's our state law. It sets up a partnership between the state and local governments. And so once a local government has what's called a local coastal program, which basically is how they will implement the Coastal Act in their local area, that gets certified by the Coastal Commission, that local government becomes the permitting and planning agency to do all that under the Coastal Act. We still retain appeal authority, and we're always involved. So it's not like the Coastal Commission goes away, but the responsibility for that coastal permitting really goes to the local government. And so one of the biggest efforts that we are undertaking over the next several years is to update all of these local coastal programs to address sea level rise, to address erosion, and understand how we should be preparing and planning for what's headed our way. There's a lot of different ways that we can look at those questions, and it's going to look different depending on where you are on the coast. And so that, I think, is where we are trying to have those conversations, is what's coming, working with local governments to look at various areas of their coastline. So we call it the neighborhood approach, but it's basically taking a local jurisdiction, looking at the areas that have physical or development similarities. There's different ways to do it. Understanding where you're getting, what the different forces are and what the risks are, the vulnerabilities. And it might be coastal erosion. It might be flooding. I mean, it just depends on the area. And then trying to understand and balance all of those so that we are retaining our beaches. We are making sure that there is a coast to access into the future, and that the habitats, the parks, all the things that we care about on our coast are resilient into the future. So it's hard. It means change, right? And I think that's the biggest challenge. A lot of local governments are going to need to go out into the community and have these difficult conversations, because we are going to lose beaches. We already are losing beaches, and it's going to accelerate into time. And there are places that it doesn't really matter what we do, we're going to lose those beaches. There are others that we have a lot of tools in the toolbox. And so understanding how to talk about that and work with the public to think through, what do we value in our, if you're in your city, for example, what places and things about your coastline do you value, and how do we protect those things while also accommodating the change that's coming. And again, we love this coastline. It's part of who we are as Californians, and it's hard to contemplate change. It's hard as a society, but it's also hard for, we're talking like individual property owners who may lose their houses because the tide's coming in. But I think the best way to think about it is, if we are, this is going to happen, and we can either let it happen and then we don't get to decide what it looks like, Mother Nature does, or we can plan for it and do our best to try to shape and make sure that we are really protecting the values and things about our coast that we want to continue into the future.
Yeah. Thank you. I want to, last question before I come out there and you can ask questions. I want to talk about something that's been sitting underneath this whole conversation. The Commission's work isn't really about beaches. It's about people. It's about Californians. It's about who gets to enjoy the coast, who gets to experience it, who feels some responsibility for it. The Coastal Act is built on the idea that the coast belongs to everyone. That's the legal principle. But feeling like you belong somewhere is something different altogether. Earlier in your career, you served as the Commission's tribal liaison and helped shape the Commission's tribal consultation policy. I wonder if you can tell us a little bit about that work and what meaningful consultation really looks like, and what that's taught you about what it takes to make the coast feel like it belongs to everyone in practice more than just in vibes.
It's such a good question, and it's work at the Commission that I have valued, some of the best work that I've done at the Commission. And I think part of what real consultation means is building a relationship with tribal governments and tribal members, and working through challenges and development in general. And sort of it is such an important part of the work that we do, and we don't have enough resources yet to do it adequately. And I say we, meaning the collective we. So on the state side, on the federal side, on the tribal side. But we're working towards it. And I give a lot of credit to this administration for really supporting that work and elevating it and the importance that it is. So I think one of the best ways that we can start to really do meaningful consultation is to understand the history and understand sort of the atrocities that were perpetrated on Native Americans in California and what that looks like, because we can't really address some of the challenges until we understand that history. And so that is one thing we've worked really hard at the Commission to get all of our staff understanding what is the experience of tribal members and governments in California, and why they approach problems in a way that they do. Problems or any issue that comes up in front of them. So that's one really important piece of it. And the other, again, is trying to build trust and relationships so that we can understand when we have a particular issue that we're looking at, whether it's a project or a local coastal program, really going to the tribes with enough time to allow them to think about it and respond and work with us and understand what their concerns are, and then really doing something about it. And the other thing that's important for us as a regulatory agency, we work with the Coastal Act. We have limitations on what we can do legally, and it's been incredibly important for us to be very clear about what that looks like, so that we are not setting up expectations that we can't meet, or we are trying to set up this trust relationship so that we are doing what we can under the law and working through, again, the issues that are raised by our tribal partners. It takes a lot of time. It has been time really well spent, but it gets back to this pressure and challenge of, we're always in this space of wanting more time to really dig into the issues, and then having folks on the other side who want us to move very, very quickly. So it's finding the right balance and making sure that we are doing both of those things, but really honoring our tribal the process and the issues raised by our tribal partners.
Thank you. Okay, Nelson, I think, has a non-corded mic. All right, who has questions? Right
here. Very interesting to hear your words. Two things. So I saw this really great documentary that I'm pretty sure you can stream called Heroes of the Coast. I don't know if you've seen it or not, but
I have.
It's so interesting how people got together to write and then advocate for the Coastal Act. So if people haven't seen it, I'm pretty sure you can watch it at home in your pajamas if you want to.
I think it's on YouTube.
And then, but my question is that, I live locally, and I really believe in some of these California environmental laws because they not only protect the environment, but protect people. So I saw the California Environmental Quality Act get significantly modified by the state legislature, and now there's going to be a ballot measure to modify it even more that I hear qualified for the ballot. And I was wondering if you worry about those kinds of attempts to weaken the Coastal Act, what those worries might be, and what people can do to help protect the Coastal Act.
Thank you for that question. To be quite honest, I worry about it every day. It's one of my biggest concerns. I mean, we are really living through somewhat of an anti-regulatory moment, right? And watching some of the changes that have gone on in CEQA has been challenging. I mean, there's a whole conversation there about CEQA and the challenges associated with that, and the reaction to it. But we have already started to see some of the similar attacks on the Coastal Act. And so there's legislation last year, there's legislation this year that it's taking the same strategy of these exemptions, small bites. Take a small bite out of the law, you kind of open it up, and then you can make it wider as time goes by. And that's exactly what's happened with CEQA. So to be quite honest, I'm very nervous about it. And I have staff in Sacramento that are fighting those attempts all the time. I think our approach to that has been, the Coastal Act is a really different law. And the policies are very high level. They're strong, but they're very flexible. And it has given us the ability to adjust to new challenges, new moments. And so we have been able to adjust and modernize without needing to change the law. And so we've been making that case that we are already doing many of the things. The housing crisis is a perfect example. There's been a lot of change at the Coastal Commission and how we think about housing. And we didn't need a law change to be thinking through that. It is a challenge for all Californians to be thinking through. But our mantra has been, we agree we need housing on the coast, and it needs to be done in a way that preserves our coastal resources and ensures access. And we're showing how that is doable. It is possible. You don't need to get rid of the law to make that possible. So the other reality and the other threat that's out there is from the federal administration. And so we are expecting some pretty tough times up ahead. So we're experiencing, we know that our program will be we have a federal program. So in addition to the state law that we implement the Coastal Zone Management Act, which is a federal law that is similar to how the Coastal Act is a partnership between local governments and state government. The CZMA is a partnership between the federal government and the state government to manage coastal resources. It's about 48 years old, so just behind the Coastal Act. And it's been really successful in that history. And we've worked really well with the federal government to manage coastal resources in California and, frankly, all around the country. We've just found out our program will be under review. So that's ominous and is making us nervous. We don't know exactly what to expect yet. It's still up in the air, but most likely there will be a public comment period and a public hearing to review our program. So just invite you all to pay attention to that because we're getting attacks from all ends at this point. So the threat is real to our law. And again, I think we try to let our record speak for itself. But we work in nuance and legal findings and science and these things that are hard to explain in sound bites. And in a time of disinformation, it's really difficult sometimes to push back on narratives that get out there where you have no idea where it came from and it's not based on any reality. And the answer to the question is kind of complicated. I feel like we live in that space a lot. And so we're doing our best to try to get the good information out there about what we're doing and what our program is about. But it's a challenge, and we expect it to get a little harder, or maybe a lot harder, over the next several years.
Really glad that you've come this evening. And my name is Jeff, and I'd like to ask a question about interagency work. And I grew up in the San Fernando Valley, and we had a lot of fire out there. And fires that are now much more catastrophic than they were before. And I'm curious because these fires now are going straight to the coast and affecting the coastal areas. And can you tell me, if you are, how are you working with like CAL FIRE, Cal Forestry, or any federal agencies to deal with these issues that have become so difficult?
Thank you for that question. That's a great one. We are, the last several years, we have been doing a lot of interagency work on wildfire. With CAL FIRE, Board of Forestry, we have existing relationships and have worked to really build those relationships between our agencies so that we are more effective and nimble in reviewing projects and getting them out the door. So the way that under the Coastal Act we have done this previously is, if there's whether it's a prescribed burn as an example or some other fire related activity would require a permit. And that can take time. And sometimes we don't have that kind of time. And so we've really worked at the commission to develop other tools that are faster and more nimble and more programmatic. So we now are more moving in this different direction where we're working with CAL FIRE, Board of Forestry, working with local RCDs, other entities to do a programmatic look at fire projects generally, so that we can do that upfront review and get those projects out the door much more quickly. Because you're right. I mean, the effects, like the devastating ecological and the effects to Californians from these fires it's getting worse, and we need to be able to act more quickly. So that's what we've worked really hard to do.
My name's Eric. I'm a board member here at Crystal Cove. I was lucky enough to grow up on the water in Newport Beach, and Newport Beach has the ocean, it has the bay, it has the back bay, it has a river that flows into it, whose name I can't remember. And you also mentioned the Banning Ranch, which I now live 2 minutes away from, and I'm very appreciative that I'll be able to go on my walks there soon. I want to better understand your jurisdiction and how you reach all these different places. To me, the Banning Ranch is adjacent to the Santa Ana River, so I don't understand what your jurisdiction or reach is.
So the Coastal Commission's jurisdiction, or the Coastal Act, the jurisdiction is the coastal zone. And the coastal zone is a boundary that was drawn as part of the Coastal Act. And it looks different depending on where you are. And it was drawn to capture important resources to the coast. So for example, in areas like in, whether you have a river delta or any type of, habitat associated with a river mouth, the coastal zone tends to go farther inland. Agricultural areas also were captured to pull those into the coastal zone. In urban areas, the coastal zone tends to be much more narrow. And so like San Francisco is an example. I think our coastal zone along Ocean Beach goes in, it's like a block or two. So it's really narrow there. And so the challenge with that is that unlike other agencies who can say, well, we are 100 feet from the edge of this particular feature, ours varies depending on where you are. And Newport is a good example because our jurisdiction goes way inland and captures most of the bay. And I don't know exactly the side on Banning Ranch and where that line is, but it was meant to capture these important resources that the state felt that the Coastal Commission should regulate with the Coastal Act.
Okay, so for those of you who don't know Professor Brett Sanders yet, get ready. Here we go.
Thank you, Kate, and thanks to the Conservancy for hosting this event tonight. And were it not for this event, I wouldn't know that Kate was going to be in Orange County. I wouldn't have known to reach out to her and to get her to swing by UCI to talk about science. So it's to your credit that we had a really fabulous discussion this morning, and thank you, Kate, for making the time. I was fortunate to be engaged in the park over the last 10 years or so, and to kind of think about their educational programming. And at a time when many of these cottages had yet to be sort of operational. But there was, I think the leadership of the Conservancy had this really cool vision that there's 2 million people coming to this park every year. And this is like an incredible opportunity for the outside world to be educated about what it means to live near the ocean and the risks that come with that, and the contemplate issues of change. There's cottages that are planned at surprisingly low elevations along this coastline, right? Which you might look at as that's a crazy risk to take. But on the other hand, it's also like an educational moment, right? Where these 2 million people that are coming to the park can think about something they might not see at any other coastline. So I guess my question for you is do you have any recommendations of knowing this space, knowing the importance of the coastal? Are there any messages that you think that this space could be used to communicate to the visitors?
That is such a fabulous question. I think yes. And I think the Conservancy and State Parks is already doing a lot of that educational effort. I think this is a great example of just what you were describing of how do we think about development right up against the beach? What does that look like? How do we contemplate change? And so understanding that things will, the sea level will rise and the beach is going to want to move back. How are we accommodating that? And we talked about a little bit with the boardwalk and how to kind of think through that, but giving that as an example. It doesn't mean that we don't get to have this development while it's here, while we can enjoy it. It's more about, it may not be permanent because the ocean may want to take it back at some point, but how do we think about that? And
I know,
hopefully
it's
this
facts.
is way past you and I, right? We're not going to have to live through that, but I think it's that planning. You guys really did an amazing job approaching the planning for this area and thinking through all those issues. And so that's hard. It's hard to do an educational placard on how to plan for sea level rise. But if we can do it, or think through maybe it's examples. It's an adaptable boardwalk that that is designed to allow for sand movement and all these other natural processes to continue. It's thinking about the creek bed and how to, all that and that component, how does that connect with the upper watershed, and how does the water, there's all kinds of issues I think that could be used to explain how we do adaptation. And that it's also adaptation is not in one chunk. It's not like, okay, here's our adaptation plan and we just implement it once and we're done. It's a constant thinking through, okay, what is nature doing now and how do we adapt to it, and what's the plan for tomorrow, and then how are we thinking about 10 years from now? And so maybe something about that could be really beneficial. Again, I don't know exactly how that shows up on a placard, but maybe it's a program or something like that. I love that idea.
Other questions? Oh, I see over here. I'm going to walk back across the stage.
Thank you. And my name is Dele Ogunshaitan. I'm a professor, colleague of Brett at UC Irvine. One of the most underappreciated benefits of access to the beach and the oceans is health. And as you ward off the threats, it's about interagency collaboration as well. Are you talking to the California Department of Public Health and some of the things we're seeing with the wildlife around these parts in response to climate change and the warming of the oceans? Thank you.
It's a great question. And just on the public health component, I think during COVID, we really lived through that because a lot of people, that the coast was the place they went to rejuvenate, for, mental health, benefits, all of these things. It was one of the safe spaces, right? We couldn't gather in internal spaces with each other, but we could be outside together. And we saw a lot of the benefits, the health benefits to making sure access to the coast remains open. And you are right about all of the potential challenges coming our way with climate change, right? And, whether it's shellfish or, seafood, whatever, as a food source, or also just as a recreational resource as we're all out sharing this ocean together. We aren't working directly with public health on that issue. It's something that we do talk about a lot and we think about if we're doing permits for that are relevant. So for example, I work a lot with the commercial fishing industry and thinking through some of those issues with them about how to maintain healthy fisheries. And we also do work with CDFW, the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, on those kinds of questions. So it's definitely a top of mind issue for all of these agencies. And now that you're bringing it up, it's making me think that we need some kind of a task force, I hate using that word, but something to bring folks together around that issue to both elevate it, educate folks on what the concerns are, what some of the solutions might be to ensure that we do have healthy oceans. But yeah, that's a great comment.
Okay, I think we have time for maybe one more. How about here?
Thanks very much for being here. One of our local resources that a lot of us enjoy is Newport Harbor. Mm-hmm. And you mentioned affordability. One of the hot topics right now is managing public access, improving public access. There's a lot of discussion about the cost future of the mooring fields and the dock space and whatnot. I'd like to get your opinions on that, and if you can predict where it's going. That's a hot topic
it is an
locally.
Incredibly hot topic, and one that I think it really came into full focus at the commission a couple of years ago. So it's an issue I'm actually intimately familiar with. We have a lot of folks who own moorings come to the commission and have been educating the commission on the challenges with affordability, the whole 9 yards. So the current status is, there was a plan from the city to change the rate structure. That was put on pause while the State Lands Commission reviewed the way that the city was approaching that. And so that review was done. They found that they were doing it in a way that wasn't fair. And so there's an effort to ensure that if they're going to move forward with it, it is done in a way that's fair. So that's as far as the city has not acted again. We are paying very close attention. That's all I'll say right now. It's unclear to us at this point where it's headed, but we care very much about affordability issues and are paying close attention to what happens there.
Who has authority?
So there's a bunch of agencies and potentially overlapping authorities, is the short answer. There's, I think the Coastal Commission has not traditionally gotten engaged in mooring rates. That's been an issue that has been dealt with harbor districts and ports and things of that nature. But that doesn't mean that we don't necessarily have jurisdiction. State Lands Commission also, these are state waters, and they generally delegate. Delegation may not be the right word, but they delegate authority to manage those state lands to the port and harbor districts, but they have an oversight role, which is why State Lands got involved here. So again, lots of overlapping jurisdiction, and it's unclear how this one is going to evolve, but it is the folks that have made regular appearances at the commission have been fantastic about explaining the challenges, the realities of what it's like to own and operate one of these moorings and the challenges they face. And that's been really helpful because it's an issue that I don't think that many of the commission staff or the commissioners understood very well, and now we get it. So I am really grateful to all those folks for educating us. And like I said, we're paying close attention.
So thank you for your questions. I have one more for you, Kate. 50 years from now, let's go 50 years down the road, when the commission celebrates its centennial, what do you hope someone says about this stretch of time, your stretch of time? What do you hope still matters, and what would make you think we used this moment well?
Well, first that we survived, but also that we put ourselves on the right track for adapting to climate change on our coastlines, and that we did what we needed to do to set up the framework to ensure that we still have all this beautiful coastline to enjoy into the future. I think that's what I would want someone to look back and say they did what they needed to do. They got the work done. It was hard, but they got it done.
Thank you. Kate, thank you for being here tonight. Thank you for the conversation, and thank you for doing a job with no finish line.
Thank you, and thank you for having me, Kate, and everybody here. It's been just been a pleasure.
It is. It's good to have you here. And to all of you, you are also, whether you are serving on a board, being a member, pulling mustard in the backcountry, picking up trash on the beach, teaching a child about the coast, or simply caring enough to come here tonight, you are also doing a job that has no finish line. And it matters because the coast is never saved. It's always being saved. So join us for a sunset reception, a glass of something, and Kate, thanks again.
Thank you.